Welcome back to Red Sea to Radar. I am joined today by Kevin Fielder. He's an FAU alum and he works for Rivals, currently covering Kansas State. So he has joined me today on the pod to give a little preview into MSU's matchup against FAU coming up here on Friday. How are you, Kevin?
Sydney, I am so excited for football season, and I'm particularly excited to talk about FAU football because I don't get a lot of opportunities to do it. But as someone who covered FAU for 5 years and still holds this program near and dear to my heart, as much as I think maybe I'd like to escape it at times, I am incredibly excited. Thanks for having me on.
I'm glad you're here. So, to give a little intro into who you are and what you do for Rivals, go ahead and tell us, when you switched over to Kansas State, how long you'd covered FAU. Just give a little background so that they know.
Yeah, so I started covering FAU mostly part time my first year as a senior in high school, and then when I made the decision to attend FAU. I began covering the program a little bit more full time. I worked for probably four or five different publications, most notably FAU's 24/7 site, Owls 24/7, which was the last 2 years of covering FAU. So in total, I covered them for about 5 years. And then once I graduated, I switched over to covering Kansas State for Rivals with EMA Online. And then in January, I became the site publisher for EMA Online.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, that's fantastic. How do you like it over there with the Kansas State people?
Yeah, I joke that like Manhattan is nothing like South Florida, and as someone who grew up in South Florida and lived there for 23 years of my existence, maybe I was ready for a change, and maybe this is the honeymoon phase still glooming over me as we sort of get adjusted. But I love it, man. Like it is so different from South Florida. The people, the craze for football is so different. Nothing against FAU fans. I love FAU fans dearly, and they know that. But the FAU fan base is significantly smaller than the Kansas State fan base, significantly. And the people are so much nicer in Manhattan than they are in South Florida. I joked with my dad that like people put their shopping carts back, and that's not a thing people do in South Florida. People in South Florida just put their shopping carts wherever they want them to go, whether it's in someone else's parking spot or the grass or what, it doesn't matter. But here everyone just returns their carts. It's just a thing they do, and it's like,
Okay,
you know what? I'll take it. I'll take it.
that's funny. Well, a glowing review for Kansas State then. That's starting off the podcast.
Glowing,
Great.
glowing.
Okay, so let's let's talk about FAU a little bit here. So they are coming to the Breslin on Friday. Looking like there might be some rain, which is unfortunate, but we'll see when the kickoff happens. Talk to me about FAU's coach, Tom Herman. He's only in his second year there. Thoughts about him and kind of where you think he'll go with this program.
Yeah, I think first of all, like the only place to start is where FAU was when they hired Tom Herman. And when they hired Tom Herman, I guess 2 years ago now at this point, FAU needed to hit that head coaching hire. I had sort of wrote about it that, you know, FAU needs to hit a home run with that hire. And it could not be another retread that fails because, Willie Taggart, as much as I think he did some positive things for FAU and definitely inherited a program that needed a little bit of work. It wasn't enough success on the field. And they had missed a bowl game in his final 2 years. And their one bowl game was during the COVID season where 4 or 5 wins would get you a bowl game. So it was sort of tough to judge him at points, but they needed to hit a home run with that hire, and I think they did it with Tom Herman. I know everyone will point to that first year, 4-8, not a very successful season on the field, but even to Tom Herman's own, I guess, admittance, right? Like it was a rebuilding year for the program. And they had sort of realized that they needed to go through a year of struggles to get the locker room they wanted, to get guys who wanted to be at FAU was sort of the biggest thing, was getting guys who were going to buy into what Tom Herman was doing. And so the difference between the mood around year one and the mood around year two is entirely different. there's a palpable level of excitement with this year's program and this year's team, and it looks like it's going to be the year. I'd sort of dubbed this in, I guess, private circles, right? The year of stability for FAU. And, they probably won't win the American this year. There's going to probably be some ugly games throughout the year, but they're going to be competitive. They're going to bring stability, and they should make a bowl game, which, when you consider where FAU has been the last 3 years, a bowl game is a promising thing. A bowl game is a good thing. And if you win 6, 7 games, you make a bowl game, you win the bowl game. That's a really good season for FAU.
I think that kind of goes along with what we're seeing at MSU. New coach this year might be a little rocky because it is a rebuilding time. And I think it's so funny how people expect coaches to come in to a new program and just like hit the ground running, great season right away. But it takes so much to rebuild a staff, and with how recruiting and NIL is now, like to kind of build their processes there to get guys that they want on their team. And it just takes time. So, it's interesting to see FAU's coach that's now in his second year to see that maybe, more stability, to see if maybe that's a model that MSU will follow with, Coach
To
Smith
some degree,
after.
I'm sure.
Yeah. Right.
Like, I
Right.
think the biggest thing is like when you look at what FAU had last season, they had two quarterbacks. They had to start two quarterbacks throughout the year. They didn't have stability at all.
Yeah.
And, maybe some of that was coaching staff, some of that was roster construction, some of that was players not wanting to be there. Like, I don't know the entire situation around what went on in that locker room throughout the year, but I could tell talking to people close to the program and within the program, like this year, people are excited. This year,
Yeah.
people are excited about what's next. And so, it's sort of that year two honeymoon phase of every rebuild where you go
Hmm.
in and you hit the transfer portal hard, you acquire players, and there's this sort of, I guess, light over the program that wasn't there a year ago, and
Yeah.
uh, FAU starting to sort of see that, and I think to some degree Michigan State will see that next year too when Jonathan Smith gets the second year with the program and gets another year of acquiring players that he wants, and it's not
Hmm.
the leftovers of a previous regime that ended in, I guess, turmoil to some degree, which,
Yeah.
FAU didn't have the same level of turmoil as Michigan State, but to some
Right.
degree, FAU still had turmoil. It was not a perfect
Right.
ending, and they had lost. They had missed out on the bowl game by a 2 point conversion against Western Kentucky in the final game,
Hmm.
and I think you ask any FAU fan, that play brings them PTSD. That play brings me
Yeah.
PTSD.
Yeah.
And I see Western Kentucky and I still hate them a little bit. So,
As you should. As you should. Yeah. um, Yeah, I mean, I think that really sums it up. Like, I was reading that he brought in 21 transfers this season. So he really did hit the transfer portal hard. Any transfers just off the top of your head that are kind of notable going into this season?
yeah, we'll talk about him, I'm sure, right? Like,
Okay.
quarterback Cam Fancher is the
Yeah.
inevitable guy that everyone talks about. So
Yeah.
I'm going to save a little bit of that analysis for when we get to the quarterback position. But, he
Yeah.
was sort of the biggest one. They have a
Hmm.
quarterback that the staff is incredibly excited for.
Yeah.
Running back CJ Campbell from Florida State. He was a preferred walk on with the Seminoles, but was able to get into the game at points, was a really good special teams player for them, and should assume a bigger role in FAU's offense. They brought in a ton of wide receivers. Milan
Hmm.
Tucker is sort of the biggest one from App State, incredibly explosive player. He's someone I'm incredibly excited for, just truthfully,
Yeah.
because they needed that level of explosiveness in the offense after losing LeJontay Wester to Colorado. And then on the defensive side of the ball, 3 or 4 new defensive linemen, probably feels like 5 new defensive backs. Like you look at this roster, and I sort of joke that I wonder if they had to do ice breaking. The first day of school
Yeah.
icebreakers.
Hmm.
Go around, say your name, and say a food that associates with your name, and then go around and doing that because the
Yeah.
roster is completely different. This is not the same
Hmm.
roster from last year, and
Hmm.
just to name one more guy that I'm incredibly excited for on defense, main transfer Kazir Brown, Bugs Brown, was I recently named to the Senior Bowl watch list. He's an NFL talent, and
Okay.
if you're looking at a player that could be a huge difference maker for FAU throughout the season on defense, in terms of newcomers, it's him.
Yeah, okay. Names to watch for. Let's jump right into offense since you kind of talked about it a little bit. So, um, quarterback Cam Fancher from Marshall. I was doing a little reading on him. A lot of people said that he's a kind of a dual threat to watch for him on the run a little bit. Talk to me more about his game and what you think he will look like against Michigan State on Friday.
Yeah, that's sort of the biggest thing is he's a dual threat quarterback with the ability to impact the game in different ways. And the biggest game from last year was NC State, where they lost by 7 points, and he accounted for somewhere around 340 yards and 4 touchdowns. And so he's proven he can do it against Power Four, Power Five
Yeah.
competition. I will say it was not always pretty last year for Cam Fancher at Marshall, and to some degree that led to discontent among fans. And there was sort of a popular clip that went around of, I think it was head coach Charles Huff. Don't someone will inevitably correct me if I'm wrong, but Huff sort of coming out and having to defend his quarterback against boos from fans because
Mm,
they were struggling, and this is, a Marshall program that has always sort of held their football program to a different standard. Their fans expect more. And when it
mhm.
doesn't come, the blame inevitably gets placed on people. And,
Yep.
Charles Huff got some of that blame. The offensive coordinator got some of that blame. And then the quarterback got the blame. And, I don't know if it was all his fault. The offensive scheme was probably not the best. The skill
Mhm.
players were incredibly inconsistent. They were talented but inconsistent. So, to some degree, yeah, the blame is going to fall on the quarterback, but it wasn't all his fault. Um, I know FAU is incredibly excited for him. This is someone that they went out and targeted heavily in the transfer portal, and to some degree thought that he would be a power four caliber quarterback when he entered. And so, for FAU to land him and to have the opportunity to build their offense around him, they're not worried about what happened at Marshall. They know the talents there. Incredibly strong arm, the dual threat ability that you mentioned. This is a
Mhm.
quarterback that's going to be able to impact games, and you know I think that he's sort of the biggest X factor for FAU in this first game, obviously. But this entire season, FAU expects high level play from him, and so far through camp and through conversations with people, he has not shown any reason to not have that sort of expectations placed on him.
Yeah, yeah. It's like in everything that I read, it seemed like everyone was very excited to have him on the squad. Like there was really no mention of kind of those struggles before. It was more just like that they were happy to have him and that he is such a dual threat that they were looking forward to see him kind of put those things out on the field and see what, Coach Herman how he could use them on the field. So, I will be curious to watch him as well because he did get very many glowing reviews, including this one. Let's talk defense, or I guess I should say anything else about offense before we jump into defense.
Yeah, the biggest thing I think is that this offense is different, but it's still incredibly talented. I know that there's a lot of faces that weren't there last year, and that inevitably leads to some, I guess, levels of question about how talented they are. But I think this is one of the best running back rooms in the American.
Okay.
Between C.J. Campbell, Zuberi Mobley, who returns from an injury from last season, Jamari Sands, Xavier Terrell, like this is a running back room that's going to be able to impact games and impact them in a really heavy way, I guess. And they pair that with an offensive line that I have doubts about. I guess I just need to see it in action first, but it's incredibly experienced at parts. And they return their center who's played 36 games for FAU. So there's reason to think this offense can be one of the better ones in the American, but there's just so many moving parts that have to get figured out. And until those get figured out, you're looking at an incomplete project that,
Mhm.
for me, if I was grading the unit, I almost would have to give it an incomplete grade just because I always say this, but like when you have so many new pieces and you have effectively a brand new wide receiver room and a few new offensive linemen, I can't give you a grade for how good you're going to be because I don't know how all these pieces gel together.
Yeah, yeah. Takes time, definitely, definitely. I mean, we're looking at that a little bit with Michigan State as well. New pieces, new coaches, not really sure how things will run. So it'll be curious to watch the offense on both sides of things because it is so new. It's so funny how much these two teams parallel each other, and I didn't even know. and with the coaching, with all the transfers coming in, just and maybe that's just the new age of football now with like players jumping all around, like teams aren't secure like that anymore. But it's interesting to hear you talk because a lot of things that you're saying, I'm curious to see in MSU's team as well. Um, Anything else about offense?
No, but I do want to just go to your point real quick of like these two
Yeah.
teams, like even as I was researching Michigan State a little bit more, I'd followed them a
Hmm.
little bit during the offseason because I thought it was so interesting. But these are two programs that are effectively the same program, just at different parts of the
Yeah.
timeline. And
Hmm. Hmm.
Michigan State might be a little bit more talented. I'll get to that a little bit later, but you know, it's still a team that like the expectations are a little low in year one for Michigan State, but there's
Hmm.
so much talent that you're sort of like, maybe this hits. Maybe
Yeah.
we're talking
Yeah.
about something that's a little bit different in week 12 as
Hmm.
opposed to, as we're recording this August 28th, a few days
Yeah.
before their
Yeah.
first game against FAU.
Hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. Do you want to talk defense? Let's
I would
see.
love to talk defense. I always love to talk defense.
In some of the research that I did, it looked like defense was pretty good last year, but lost quite a few players. Talk to me about what that looks like now and kind of what you expect.
Yeah, so I mean, the biggest losses were along the defensive line, and they had lost Latrell Jean and Decarius Hawthorne to the transfer portal. Jean going to Temple, Hawthorne going to USF in the American. But the biggest loss was both in size and talent. Evan Anderson, the 330-pound monster who
Mhm.
manned FAU's defensive line, the nose tackle position for 3 or 4 years, and did it at an incredibly high level. He was an all-conference player for FAU, and he decided to go pursue the NFL and was picked up by the San Francisco 49ers. I don't know if he made the 53-man roster. I actually meant to check that. I don't think he did, but this is a defensive line that has uh, to the best part of it, figure it out. And they return a few guys who coaches are incredibly excited about. Jaden Wheeler and Jacob Merrifield being the two that have the most experience that coaches are incredibly excited for. Merrifield has grown every year at FAU, and I remember his first year as a true freshman. He had been asked to, or rather, he had been put in some pretty tough positions, sort of playing as a nose tackle, being 270 pounds, and sort of getting blown up at the point of attack. But this is not the same Jacob Merrifield that I covered as a true freshman, and he's grown as a player, and he's looked like a formidable college football player at the American level. Jaden Wheeler, 18 Wheeler is his nickname, and he is about as strong as an 18 Wheeler. I'm convinced he could lift an 18 Wheeler if you asked him to. Uh, Incredibly strong, has some incredibly solid power rush moves because of that strength. And so those two guys are the guys who they're expecting from last year's defensive line to contribute. But they also went out and they brought in a few guys to, I guess, fill the void. The biggest one for me is Prince Boyd Jr., who played at Purdue and is incredibly explosive. I think inside, and he's going to be someone that FAU asks a lot from. He's not going to replace Evan Anderson, but he should help fill some of the production, and that's sort of the biggest thing. The other guy who I'm a little bit excited about, I don't know what his fit looks like year one, but Wilkie Donnell is a guy who I covered in high school who was incredibly talented in high school, went to play for FAU defensive coordinator Rock Bellantoni at Auburn. And, when he entered the transfer portal this year, he had moved to Mississippi State originally and then transferred to FAU. So the defensive line and the pass rush room is different. They're going to need this defensive line and pass rush room to be at a high level. The pass rush has been a problem for FAU in the past, and they have the talent now to replace that and become a formidable pass rush room, but sort of like the offense in general, a little bit incomplete until I see how these pieces fit. But the history from this defensive line and pass rush room is incredibly concerning for me because in years past, they just didn't generate enough pressure. They were good against the run, but when you can't generate pressure in college football, you're just not going to win games. And
Yeah.
I guess that's part of the reason why they were always 5-7, 4-8, sort of teetering in that range.
Yeah. So, looking at the season overall, it might be hard to say. make a real prediction since, like we've said a bunch of times, there is a bunch of new pieces. Things are kind of you're unsure until you see them have a couple games under their belt. But just going off maybe vibes and what you've heard from inside the program, what do you think as far as like a season outlook overall for FAU?
I will always go off vibes when picking schedule predictions because,
Yeah,
frankly, college football is all about vibes half the time.
yeah.
Look, this is a good football team. This is a solid football team. I don't know if they're really good yet. I think they
Mm-hmm.
have the potential to be really good this year, and it would not shock me if by the end of the year we're talking about a team that won 8 or 9 games and was competing for a spot in the American championship game. But I guess, as I mentioned, so many moving pieces, so many new faces. I know coaches are incredibly excited about what this defense looks like, and they think this is one of the best defenses in college or in the American. And for good reason. CJ Hurd was a freshman All American. You know, the linebacker room is one of the most experienced in college football and one of the best in the American and arguably in college football. Jackson Ambush and Desmond Tisdale were incredible last season, and to return both of them, along with Eddie Williams, along with Jared Gerald's, like so many guys who they returned in that linebacker room, who are going to make an impact throughout the season. The defense gives me reason to believe that they can be one of the best teams in the American. I just have a few questions about the offense that haven't been figured out yet. So for me, I think the expectation and sort of the goal is to make a bowl game. And depending on who they match up against, the American does have some against Power Five opponents, including the Boca Bowl. That so like I don't want to say like, oh, they have to win the bowl game, but I think they
Yeah.
have to make a bowl game. There is no other way that this season goes that's considered a success. And I don't think if they don't make a bowl game, Tom Herman's going to be on the hot seat, and we'll be talking about them having another coach. But I think that he needs to make a bowl game because the program has sort of placed that as an expectation, partly because of what Lane Kiffin did in his years here and what the program
Hmm.
has the potential to be. So I think that just like baseline expectations, 6, 7 wins, beating your rivals, which this season is FIU in non-conference play, and then USF in conference play later in the year. Those are games that I think you may have to win. Uh, the, Look at last year. FAU fans love to bring it up, so I'm going to bring it up. They beat the crap out of USF. It was an embarrassment to USF.
Yeah.
So they've had the edge against USF in their one matchup so far, but I think that they need to win those games and they need to make a bowl game. Everything after that is probably, I guess, the sprinkles on top of the cake per se, or whatever new cliche you want to use to explain a positive season with a little bit of extra flair in it.
Yeah. Yeah. To go on a little bit of a tangent for a second on something you said, what do you think the expectation should be for a new coach before they are in the hot seat? Like, how many seasons does it truly take to build a new team? And in the new era of the transfer portal, I think that throws a wrench in it too because guys come and leave more than they
Yeah,
used to. Um, because MSU's in a similar situation. How long should schools and fans give coaches to realistically build things up before they hold them, to a true, high standard?
yeah, I think you begin judging coaches in year 3 of their tenure. Year
Hmm.
one is going to be the year that for most coaches, unless it's Kalen DeBoer at Alabama, where you inherit a
Right.
program that made the
Hmm.
playoff last year, or
Yeah.
Saron Moore at Michigan, I guess little brothers, depending on who you ask. But like if you inherit a program that's really good, the expectation is that you should just continue doing that, and you have the talent to continue doing that. But in the case of Michigan State and FAU, these programs were not ready to compete.
Hmm.
Michigan State's not competing for the Big Ten championship this year. I think they've
Yeah.
got enough talent to compete for for a bowl game and win 6 games.
Hmm.
I guess I haven't checked their schedule fully, but I think that they've got enough talent to win 6 games. So I guess year one is sort of the mulligan year of whatever happens, it's either a positive or it's whatever. Year
Yeah.
two is sort of where you start to see the culture and the makings be built. I think
Hmm.
that for FAU and maybe Michigan State next year, there's still going to be some rough patches. It's not going to be
Yeah.
all pretty. You know, the expectation is that you're competitive and that you win 6 games probably. Year two of
Yeah.
any rebuild should probably be a bowl game. But year three is like, if you haven't figured it out by year three, you've had three
Hmm.
years of the transfer portal, you've had 3 years of recruiting classes and player development and hiring your own staff. It's probably just not going to work out there because,
Yeah.
year three is where you should have built this thing up. You should have high school players ready to compete. You should be able
Hmm.
to dip into the transfer portal and replace those guys who you need to replace. And, maybe you're not winning the conference, but you should be competitive. You should be reaching the expectations that the program has set
Yeah.
through other coaches' tenures. And so, whether that's competing for the conference championship or winning 8, 9 games, occasionally double digits, year three is where I think that you fully start to judge a coach and what they've built, whether it's successful or not. I know people want to say that year two you can do it because they've had 2 years of the transfer portal, but to some degree, they've also had 2 years of their programs being completely ravaged by the transfer portal. So
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
still a little bit hard to judge, but I still think 3 years is sort of the baseline. And obviously, things can change depending on the program you inherit. But Michigan State and
Yeah.
FAU both have enough talent where year three should be the year where everything starts to come together.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I agree with that timeline. Um, just something for Spartan fans to keep in mind as we head into this season. Um, and maybe Coach Smith will absolutely shock our pants off, but I don't know. Hard to
Yeah, you
say.
know what? Maybe he goes 12-0 this year. I've seen
He
weirder in
could.
college football,
He could.
so it wouldn't
I
shock me.
really Do you know anything about Jonathan Smith? Do you have any comments about him coming to MSU? Any thoughts on that at all?
Yeah, I mean, I loved the hire when they made it.
Hmm.
I guess my fun little hobby is following coaching staffs and who goes
Okay.
where and sort of having
Yeah.
opinions on everything like that. I loved the hire. I thought he did
Yeah.
an incredible job at Oregon State, and Oregon
Hmm.
State is not the best place to recruit for both resources, for budget, for
Yeah.
location. You can get guys to go to Oregon because Oregon's sponsored by Nike. Oregon State is not Nike's little donor
Yeah.
buddy, but like he did incredibly well there. You look at the
Hmm.
talent that last year's team had at quarterback, at running back, on that offense, and the way that they were able to be successful despite all the uncertainty around the Pac 12 and their future as a team. And so I think that's sort of the biggest sign of a good college football coach. When you're able to do that and find ways to make it work, despite, whatever happens around you. That's why I think it's going to work at Michigan State. It might take a
Hmm.
year or two, as I mentioned, but I have utmost confidence that he gets it to work at Michigan State because I think he can recruit that area well. I think he can find sort of maybe the underrated guys that some of the bigger schools in the area are not going after, but they have a ton of talent because that's what he did at Oregon State. He was not recruiting the 5 stars at Oregon State. He was recruiting the 3 stars and the transfers who wanted to return back to the area if they were from there. And he did that incredibly well. So I think that he can do that at Michigan State as well. I think next year you'll start to see it sort of come together. And I know that
Yeah.
Aiden Childs, their quarterback, is someone who uh, has the eligibility to be there for another year and sort of help figure it out. And that's the most important thing is he won't be searching for a quarterback next year,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
presume. And you'll be able to build around the quarterback, hopefully that has been with Smith for 2 years now.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I agree with all those points. I also think he was a great hire, and he just seems like the type of guy that the program needed. Mel Tucker, I just don't think he was that guy. And that's, me saying that now after all of those things have happened. But I he just was a different fit, and I think Coach Smith has a philosophy that maybe fits in with prior coaches and kind of what we're used to as a head coach here at Michigan State. So
Yeah,
we'll see.
I think the biggest thing is Smith is not afraid to get dirty and find the guys who other programs are not recruiting. And
Hmm.
Michigan State is not at the same level as FAU or Oregon State in terms of who they can and cannot recruit, but to some degree, they're also limited in that they're not going to be able to go recruit every 5 star that comes out of Michigan or every 5 star that comes out of Ohio. But
Hmm.
if you can be competitive with those 3 stars and those 4 stars who may not be the highest targets for those other schools, you
Hmm.
can build a program that's incredibly competitive. And
Yeah.
can surprise a lot of people. And so I think that, the history of Jonathan Smith doing that before is encouraging enough for me to say he can probably do it at Michigan State as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so looking at the matchup on Friday, talk to me about how you think things shake out for FAU versus MSU.
Yeah, it's always been I guess the monkey on the back for FAU is they've never been able to win the game against a Power Four or Power Five opponent, and they've gotten close against other Big Ten schools. They went down to the wire with Purdue and lost 2 years ago, and last year they were incredibly competitive against an Illinois team that I think is a little bit similar talent wise to this year's Michigan State team, and
Mm-hmm.
they almost won it. Now probably some of that was down to quarterback play. FAU was down to their second string backup quarterback in Daniel Richardson, and it sort of all fell apart at the end of the game. So
Mm-hmm.
I think that like FAU has the talent to win this game. FAU has the talent and the coaching to win this game and surprise people. But on the other side of that, Michigan State is still more talented than FAU, right? Like I don't think it's going to take a lot to say that that Michigan State, even in year one of this rebuild, is a more talented football program pound for pound than what Michigan or that what Florida Atlantic is. So I
Mm-hmm.
think that like this game is going to be one of the more interesting ones in this week one slate because you have two programs that are still a little bit uncertain into how to judge them. And I would love to pick FAU, right? Like as the FAU alum who spent way too much money
Mm-hmm.
to attend FAU for 4 years. I would love to sit here and just say like FAU wins and end it. But
Mm-hmm.
I am also, I guess, to some people's dismay, the most brutally honest person in FAU Twitter. To the point that like I think FAU is going to keep this game competitive, and I think that they're going to make some plays. And we're going to be talking about a game where in the fourth quarter it's a 1 or 10 point game, and you're talking about whether this game is an upset alert or not, and upset in air quotes. But I think Michigan State just wins. Home game, Jonathan Smith's first game in charge.
Mm-hmm.
A dynamic dual threat quarterback that is going to be the best athlete on the field when he's on the field. Like
Yeah.
those three things can normally win you a game, and I think
Yeah.
that like it's going to be close. So I think if I had to place a score prediction, 28-26 or 25, something around there. 3 points to 7 points. Where at the end of the game, we talked about how good of a game it was and how FAU just got this close again to beating the Power Five program, but I just can't look past the quarterback that Michigan State has because I think that like in these kind of games, the quarterback is the ultimate decider. And Aiden Childs is someone who I was incredibly excited about last season and thought he probably should have played a little bit more. And so we're talking about him being able to be the starter in an offense that he's familiar with. So I I just can't get past that as sort of the ultimate decider. And I know that there is some uncertainty around Michigan State's talent at certain positions where I think FAU can probably compete with them. The biggest one for me being wide receiver, Michigan State's wide receivers against, FAU's secondary. And I think that's sort of the matchup that decides this game. But I think that the quarterback's going to be the biggest difference maker. And Childs is better than Fancher. And that's sort of the biggest reason why I think Michigan State wins this game in the end.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't want to say I agree, but of course I agree. um,
You could say you agree. You run a Michigan State podcast. I think people want to hear you say that
right.
you agree.
Right. Yeah, I'm pretty sure they have. I was just saying, so Spartans Illustrated puts out a prediction um post every week of like score predictions from everyone on the team, and I always refrain from participating because I'm always like, well, we're gonna blow them out. We're gonna blow them out. Anybody, we're gonna blow them out. So I don't
I
put my
think
score predictions out there.
I think you asked me Friday night what my score prediction is, and this is why I'm glad we're not recording like Thursday night, Friday morning. I'd be like,
Yeah.
yeah, you know what? FAU's going to win by 100 points, and no one's going to stop them. Of
Yep.
course, we're
Yep.
talking Wednesday, and I'm a little bit more level headed. The excitement hasn't quite kicked in now. Friday night at when does the game start? 7 o'clock, 7
Yeah.
o'clock, whenever it
7.
starts.
Mhm.
I'm going to be, playing the fight song, singing at the top of my lungs. Might get a couple
Of course.
noise complaints from my neighbors, but you know what? It's FAU week one. I get a little bit too excited, and then I always inevitably get let down at the end. But that's also the life of being a college football fan. You're always constantly living on the edge.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's half the fun, I think.
That's all the fun. I
Um,
would argue that's all the fun of being a college football fan.
maybe. Anything else that you want to share about this matchup or about FAU overall?
No, I think we've pretty much covered everything.
Yeah,
I'm just incredibly excited to have college football back. I'm
me
so
too.
excited to be able to talk about other teams and not just talk about how a guy looked in practice for the sixth straight week.
Right, right. Yeah. That summer content gets to be a bit boring after a while. Yes, I
I
absolutely
love it,
agree.
but I also don't want to keep writing about the 2025 recruit that has somehow
Yeah,
is visiting the school this week, guys. Don't worry, he's visiting.
yeah, yeah. Well, thank you so much, Kevin, for joining the podcast. And like I said, Michigan State will take on FAU at home this Friday. Um, Spartans Illustrated will be covering the game in the press box, and be sure to check out the site for pregame, postgame. Follow us on Twitter. We'll be pumping out all sorts of information during the game. And follow Red Cedar Radar on Twitter and check us out on YouTube as well. Thanks so much, Kevin. His socials will be linked down below so you can check out all of his stuff through Rivals.